What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Young Brother of Soul podcast show. And guess what? It is me, your guy, the Young Brother of Soul. Alright, first and foremost, yes, I know it's been a while since the Young Brother Soul did a episode of the Young Brother Soul podcast show. And trust and believe, I didn't forget about the ones that definitely want to be interviewed on the Young Brother Soul podcast show. And I also still would like to thank those that have been supporting me throughout my podcast. You know, I really appreciate Psych Dog, but all jokes aside though, I really appreciate all those that have been supporting me throughout my podcast. You know, like I said, I'm loving this podcast. You know, I appreciate the support and, you know, can't wait to interview more people in the future, as I should say. So, yeah, I'm gonna keep on saying it. I miss the NFL. I miss football season. I mean, baseball season is about to start. Basketball is going on. Well, the Sixers, excuse me, and of course the Flyers. Well, they've been winning lately, but yeah, as of right now, I just can't wait to see what the Phillies are going to do this year. Even though I did say that I'm not looking forward to watching them play because of last year, but it might be a little slightly different situation this year. Who knows? But yeah. So the NFL draft is coming. It's going to be here pretty soon. I cannot wait to the NFL draft. I love the NFL draft. And not only that, you get to see what players that your team is going to draft, of course. Hopefully they'll be the high draft pick that you want, and hopefully that they won't be a draft bust. Trust and believe, there are always a lot of talented draft players, and there are always a lot of draft busts. Not just the NFL. It goes in all sports. Basketball, baseball, hockey. Yeah. Even wrestling. Yeah. Yeah, even wrestling. So, on today's episode, what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about the NFL's best draft class, or, as I should say, best draft year. Now, of course, there's always a year or two, or maybe, depending on what year it is, that you have some wonderful draft class. Now, some of these draft classes, they do have some Super Bowl champions, and trust and believe, they have some tremendous Hall of Fame players. Some of these players wasn't even drafted in the first round, which is quite shocking. And some of these players haven't been inducted in the Hall of Fame yet, but their time is definitely coming. So, starting off the list with the best draft class of all time is the 1996 NFL draft. Now, this draft class definitely was a phenomenal draft class. I mean, yes, there are quite a few Super Bowl champions. And not only that there are 7 Hall of Famers from this class so far. 7. And there is one noticeable undrafted player from this draft class. He was a kicker. Adam Vinatieri, 4-time Super Bowl champion. And not only that, he kicked 4 game-winning field goals for the Patriots in the Super Bowl 36 and Super Bowl 38. Yeah. Can you believe it that Adam Vinatieri was not drafted? That is crazy. Now, the other notable players that have been drafted in this class is, Keyshawn Johnson. I mean, he wasn't really there for, well, I shouldn't say he wasn't there. He wasn't he didn't do as much that they expected him to do when he was with the Jets, but he did win a Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then we also have the great Ray Lewis, Jonathan Ogden, Marvin Harrison, Brian Dawkins, which I'm surprised that he was not a first round draft pick. My hometown team, all-time legendary safety. And then, of course, we got Mr. Terrell Owens, Zach Thomas, Terry Glenn, Eddie George, Mike Alston, who was a phenomenal fullback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Lawyer Malore, great safety for the Patriots, Muhsin Muhammad, who was a phenomenal receiver for the Carolina Panthers and the Chicago Bears. And we also have Teddy Bruschi, who was part of that Patriots dynasty team. And we have Joe Horn. Joe Horn was a wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints. He was a receiver that did one of the most craziest touchdown celebration when he pulled up a cell phone and act like he was calling somebody. That was good. But yeah, it was also a wide receiver draft class. Like I said, Marvin Harrison, Terry Glenn, Muhsin Muhammad, Joe Horn. You know, that was a phenomenal wide receiver draft class. And not only that, Jonathan Ogden and Ray Lewis were the first two draft picks for the Baltimore Ravens. Yeah. Another tremendous, wonderful draft class, as I should say, draft year, is, the 1971 NFL draft class. Now, this draft class definitely was a phenomenal draft class. And not only that, they have 5 Hall of Famers from this draft class. Believe it or not, Jim Plunkett was the first overall pick from this class. He was drafted by the Patriots. He wasn't the same Jim Plunkett that you think he was. Then he would go on to the 49ers, and then he would go on to the Raiders, which he won 2 Super Bowls. Jim Plunkett. And then we also had legendary Saints quarterback Archie Manning, who is the father of Eli and Peyton Manning. And not only that, he was the Saints' lone superstar, 10 years facing all those losing records. Archie Manning, he was a good quarterback. And then we also have quarterback Dan Pestaruni. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name. Please forgive me. Correct me if I'm wrong. Leave a comment. He was a quarterback of the Houston Oilers. And not only that he was the quarterback of the Houston Oilers, he took the Oilers to back-to-back AFC championships in the 70s. Yeah, in the 70s. We also have players like Harold Carmichael, who was a 6'8" wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, who still leads the team with records of yardage. Wide receiver. Yeah, Harold Carmichael. Yeah. We also have the great John Riggins, who started with the Jets, and then he would win a Super Bowl with the Washington Redskins, who was a phenomenal running back, and he was hard to bring down. He was also quite a character, too. Then we will also have all-time, one of the most feared hitting safeties, Jack Tatum, who played for the Oakland Raiders, who won Super Bowl 11. And we also have one of the greatest defensive ends who was drafted by the Los Angeles Rams. And he also played in the Super Bowl with a broken leg. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, Jack Youngblood, who was a phenomenal defensive end for the Los Angeles Rams. And we also had a very underrated quarterback by the name of Ken Anderson, who played for the Cincinnati Bengals, who does not get the credit that he deserves. And he's still not in the Hall of Fame, which is quite crazy. Then we also had Lyle Alonso, who was a phenomenal defensive end for the Denver Broncos, and then he would go on and win a Super Bowl with the Los Angeles Raiders. And then last but not least, we had a heck of a quarterback by the name of Joe Theismann, who was the quarterback of the Washington Redskins, who won Super Bowl 17. And not only that, he was also be known as the quarterback that had his leg broken in Monday night game against the New York Giants. So, yeah. Can you imagine if Joe Theismann would have never broken his leg? I think he definitely would have been in the league longer than what he had been, but yeah. It's a shame he broke his leg, career-ending injury. But he still was a phenomenal quarterback. So, yeah, we give it to Joe Theismann. Yeah. Another phenomenal draft class from the NFL is, the 1967 NFL draft class. Now, this draft class definitely is a phenomenal draft class. And not only that, it has quite a few Hall of Famers. Yeah, quite a few. They had 10 Hall of Famers, by the way. And not only that, those Hall of Fame players from that draft class would be Bubba Smith from the Baltimore Colts, who would also turn to be a actor later on after his career in the NFL. And then we will also have Bob Greasy, who was the quarterback of the perfect Dolphins season in 1972. And not only that, we also had a great running back with the name of Floyd Little, who played for the Denver Broncos. And then we will also have a phenomenal defensive tackle by the name of Alan Page, who was the first defensive tackle to be called MVP of an NFL season. He would be part of the Purple People Eater, and then later on, after his career ended, he would become a Supreme Court Justice. Shout out to Alan Page for that. And not only that, we will also have the great Gene Upshaw, who was a phenomenal left guard for the Oakland Raiders, who won 2 Super Bowls. He was a heck of a, offensive lineman for that Raiders O-line from Super Bowl 11. Yeah, Gene Upshaw, phenomenal player. And then we also had Lem Barney, who was a defensive back for the Detroit Lions, who was a phenomenal defensive back. And last but not least, we have Willie Lanier, who was a tremendous and intelligent linebacker for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was part of the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl IV team. And not only that, he was the team leader in a good way. Yeah. Another one of the most phenomenal draft class, or years, as I should say. The 2007 NFL draft class. Now, this draft class, believe it or not, has 4 Hall of Famers. And not only that, they're going to get more Hall of Famers. And of course, they have a couple Super Bowl players from this draft class. This draft class, well, this one draft player was a bust. And he would be quarterback Jamarcus Russell, who was drafted first overall by the Oakland Raiders. He was only in the league for like 2 or 3 years, and his weight caught up to him. Yeah, poor field play. And they gave him all that money. Draft bust. Another draft bust on this list would be Brady Quinn, another quarterback who would be drafted by who other than the Cleveland Browns. Yeah, Brady Quinn. Ah, boy. Yeah. Cleveland. How many quarterbacks are you going to go through? Another phenomenal player that definitely was drafted from this phenomenal draft class would be Calvin Johnson. Calvin Megatron Johnson was a phenomenal wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. It's a shame that he retired too soon, but I believe if he would have went to a different team, he probably would have stayed in the league longer than what he had. But Megatron, Calvin Johnson, 6'5", all you had to do was throw that ball up, he'll jump up and catch it. Calvin Johnson was good. And then we also would have Joe Thomas, who was the left tackle for the Cleveland Browns, who was also a Pro Bowl player. Joe Thomas was good. He was a good left tackle. Good left tackle. Another player that definitely got drafted from this draft class would be running back Adrian Peterson, who was a phenomenal running back for the Minnesota Vikings. And not only that, he was 9 yards short from breaking Eric Dickerson's single season rushing record. 9 yards after a torn ACL. Yeah. Can you imagine if he would have broke that record? Oh, Adrian Peterson definitely would have been talked about for years. I mean, he's still talked about, don't get me wrong, but 9 yards short, man, it's a shame he didn't get it. Another player that definitely was part of this draft class would be linebacker Patrick Willis. Patrick Willis definitely was a phenomenal linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers. Not only that, he would be part of that Super Bowl 47 team. They didn't win it, but he still was part of the team. And not only that, he definitely was a Pro Bowl linebacker, and he hit hard. But for some reason, he retired too soon, probably due to injury. If he would have never had an injury, he probably would have stayed in the league way longer than what he would have. Patrick Willis definitely was the captain of that defense. Another great player from that draft class is Marshawn Beast Mode Lynch. Marshawn Lynch actually started his career with the Buffalo Bills, and then later on he would get traded to the Seattle Seahawks, where he had that most famous run in the playoff against the New Orleans Saints. He had the most craziest run in that game. It was hard for them to bring him down, and he ran it for a touchdown. That is why he is called Beast Mode. And not only that, he would be definitely part of that Super Bowl 48 champion Seattle Seahawks. And he would go on and play with the Oakland Raiders and then come back to the Seattle Seahawks. Marshawn Lynch is a phenomenal running back. And not only that, he's definitely going to the Hall of Fame. I definitely see that. And we will also have great players like Darrelle Revis. Darrelle Revis was a phenomenal defensive back, cornerback for the New York Jets. Then he would go on to Tampa Bay, and then he would win Super Bowl 49 with the New England Patriots, and then go back to the Jets and then the Chiefs. But Darrelle Revis definitely was a phenomenal cornerback. He was a shutdown cornerback, and not only that he was a shutdown cornerback, his nickname was Revis Island. That means that nobody couldn't really do nothing with Darrelle Revis. He definitely was a lockdown cornerback. Ah, boy. Yeah, Darrelle Revis definitely was a heck of a player. Another player from that draft class definitely would be the great tight end Greg Olsen, who started with the Chicago Bears, and then he is mostly known as the Carolina Panthers. He was part of that Super Bowl 50 run with the Carolina Panthers, and not only that, he is part of Fox's commentary team. Greg Olsen definitely was a good tight end. Yeah, I just wish he would have played a little longer, because he definitely was a phenomenal tight end. Yeah. We also would have Eric Weddle, a wonderful safety for the San Diego Chargers, Ravens, and then he would win Super Bowl 56 with the LA Rams. Eric Weddle definitely is a phenomenal safety. I think he's underrated. I don't think he get the credit that he deserves, but Eric Weddle definitely was part of that draft class of 2007. And last but not least, we have Marshall Yanda, who was drafted in the 3rd round by the Baltimore Ravens. He played guard, and not only that, he was part of that Super Bowl 47 winning team of the Baltimore Ravens. Marshall Yanda definitely was a draft steal, but he wasn't a 1st round draft pick. Sometimes you don't have to be a 1st round draft pick to be good in the NFL. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. But yeah, Marshall Yanda definitely was part of that 2007 draft class, and he is a Super Bowl champion. Phenomenal football player. So, going on to the next class on this list, definitely have some Hall of Famers and definitely have a couple Super Bowl champions. And this draft class is the draft class of 1981. Now, this draft class has mostly known for defensive players. This was like a defensive draft. But these players are definitely notable, as you should say. There are 8 Hall of Famers from this draft class, like I said earlier. And not only that, there are a couple Super Bowl champions. Starting from this list, people consider him the greatest outside linebacker of all time in the NFL, And that is, ladies and gentlemen, Lawrence Taylor, the original LT. Lawrence Taylor was a phenomenal outside linebacker for the New York Giants. And not only that he's a Hall of Famer, he's also a 2-time Super Bowl champion. Lawrence Taylor, man. I seen him bull rush people. I seen people try to double team him. They tried to triple team him. It still did not work, and he still would get to the quarterback. Yeah, he definitely still would get to the quarterback. Lawrence Taylor, phew, definitely earned my respect. Another player from that draft class would be Kenny Easley. Kenny Easley was a wonderful safety for the Seattle Seahawks. His career didn't last that long because he was going through a sickness. If he would have never went through the sickness that he went through, he definitely would have lasted longer in the NFL. Unfortunately, I believe a few years ago, not a few years ago, maybe like a year or two ago, he would pass away. But Kenny Easley was a phenomenal safety. He was tall, he was physical, but his career only lasted for 6 or 7 years, like I said, due to an illness. He did make it to the Hall of Fame though, but man, can you imagine if he would have never went through that health scare? Like I said, he definitely would have made it, and he definitely would have played longer in the NFL, and he definitely would have had wonderful more stats than what he had. But Kenny Easley definitely was part of that 1981 draft class, and he was a phenomenal football player. Another player from that draft class is they consider him the greatest safety of all time. And this safety, this player, ladies and gentlemen, is the great Ronnie Lott. Now, Ronnie Lott definitely was a phenomenal safety for, you guessed it, excuse me, the 1980s San Francisco 49ers. He definitely was the heart and soul of that defense that he played with back in the day. And not only that, he was physical. He caught a lot of interception. He definitely hit hard. He was a hard hitter. And I believe he had his finger amputated. Got his finger amputated, and he kept playing. That shows you how much of a good player Ronnie Lott was. He definitely was part of this 1981 draft class. Shout out to Ronnie Lott, man. Another player from this 1981 draft class definitely is in the Hall of Fame, and definitely was a great middle linebacker. And that man, as I should say, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Singletary. Now, Mike Singletary was drafted by the Chicago Bears. He definitely would be part of that 85 Bears defense. And not only that, he was a trash talker, but he could back it up. He would become a head coach later on after his career was over. But he definitely was part of that 81 draft class, and he was part of the 85 Bears. And he shut down Eric Dickerson, in that 1985 NFC Championship. Mike Singletary definitely was a phenomenal player. And not only that, he's in the Hall of Fame. Well deserved. Another player from that 1981 draft class is the great Howie Long. Now, everybody knows Howie Long used to play with the LA Raiders, and he did win a Super Bowl. But a lot of people will also know him as a commentator on Fox with Terry Bradshaw and Michael Strahan on Sundays. Howie Long was a phenomenal defensive tackle for the LA Raiders. And not only that, he is a Super Bowl champion, and he is in the Hall of Fame. Shout out to Howie Long, man. Howie Long, you all right with me. Another player from that draft class of 1981, linebacker Ricky Jackson. Ricky Jackson was a phenomenal linebacker for the New Orleans Saints. Not only that, he led the teams in so many tackles and interceptions and forced turnovers. Ricky Jackson, definitely a Hall of Famer. Definitely deserves it. And another player from that draft class of 1981, the last one, is Russ Grimm. Russ Grimm would definitely be a Hall of Famer because he was part of the Hogs offensive lineman for the Washington Redskins. And not only that, he did win 2 Super Bowls, and he is definitely in the Hall of Fame. Well deserved, Russ Grimm. Well deserved. All right. Going on the list, another wonderful draft class is 1964 NFL draft class. Now, this draft class definitely has 11 Hall of Famers. And not only that, they do have a couple Super Bowl champions. But starting off this list would be offensive tackle Bob Brown, who got drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles. Bob Brown was a phenomenal offensive tackle. And not only that, he would go on and play for a couple more teams, but Bob Brown is on the Hall of Fame. Well deserved. Another player from that draft class is running back Charlie Taylor. Charlie Taylor would be drafted by the Cleveland Browns, and he would go on and play with a couple more teams, but phenomenal running back for the Cleveland Browns. And he is also in the Hall of Fame. So Charlie Taylor, well deserved. We will also have another defensive tackle from this draft class, and that is Carl Eller. Carl Eller would be part of that Purple People Eater Minnesota Vikings team that made it to 4 Super Bowls. He definitely was part of that defensive line, like I said, the Purple People Eater, and they were a phenomenal defensive line for those Minnesota Vikings team, even though they didn't win the Super Bowls, but they've been to 4. But Carl Eller definitely is a Hall of Famer, well deserved. Paul Warfield. Now, Paul Warfield definitely was a phenomenal wide receiver. He got drafted by Cleveland, and then he would be part of the 1972 Perfect Dolphins team and 1973. Paul Warfield was a phenomenal, and to me, a very underrated wide receiver in the NFL during that time. But he is in a Hall of Fame because he definitely well deserved it. Paul Warfield. Shout out to Paul Warfield. Yeah. Another player from that draft class is Paul Krause. Now, Paul Krause actually got drafted by the Washington Redskins, and then he would go on later in life and play with the Minnesota Vikings. Not only that he's in the Hall of Fame, he is the only safety in the NFL to this day that still leads the league with interceptions, and that is 81 career interceptions. 81. It hasn't been broken yet, and he still holds the record. And not only that, he would be part of those 1970s Minnesota Vikings teams. But Paul Krause, definitely a Hall of Famer, and his record is still on hold. Do you think his record's going to be broken? Who knows, but to this day, he still has the record, 81. Another player from that draft class would be Matt Snell. Now, Matt Snell was a running back for the New York Jets. And not only that, he was the only player that scored the only touchdown in Super Bowl III. Yeah, Matt Snell. Yeah, definitely a phenomenal running back. Played with Joe Namath, so yeah, they beat the Baltimore Colts. Another player from that draft class is Bob Hayes. Now, Bob Hayes was a track runner. He was a track star. He was fast, and not only that, he played with the Dallas Cowgirls. He definitely is in the Hall of Fame, and not only that, he was part of that Super Bowl. No, let me stop. He was part of that Super Bowl VI team of the Dallas Cowboys. Phenomenal wide receiver. Fast. Like I said, he was a track star, and nobody couldn't keep up with him. Another player from that draft class would be, believe it or not, Bill Parcells. Bill Parcells is also known as the head coach of the New York Giants, who won 2 Super Bowls. But he will also play in the NFL by the Detroit Lions. And not only that, he will become head coaches of different teams. He turned the teams around, especially with the Patriots and the Jets. And then later on, he will become the head coach of the Dallas Cowgirls. But yeah, Bill Parcells actually got drafted. He's actually part of that 1964 draft class. Yeah, Bill Parcells. Another player that's definitely part of that draft class is Howard Mudd, who was a phenomenal offensive lineman who became an offensive line coach, phenomenal. And then we would definitely have a wonderful quarterback, and that quarterback would be Roger Staubach. He would go on to play, he would serve with the Navy, then come back and play with the Dallas Cowgirls. But he would win 2 Super Bowls. So shout out to Roger Staubach. He was actually a good quarterback. Definitely was. And then we had Bill Curry, who was a phenomenal center for the Cowboys and the Colts. Won 2, no, not the Cowboys. I believe it was the Packers. Won 2 Super Bowls. So, yeah, Bill Curry, definitely part of that draft class of 1964. Roger Staubach, definitely part of that draft class of 1964. And then we will also have Monty Griffin, who was a phenomenal offensive lineman, but he would definitely be the defensive coordinator for the 2002 Super Bowl champions, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Yeah. Another phenomenal draft class. One of the best draft class that I know, that I've seen. The draft class of 2011. That draft class was phenomenal. There's no Hall of Famers yet, but I'm pretty sure that these guys will be in the Hall of Fame. The only thing is with this draft class, the quarterbacks, I mean, the only 3 that were busts were Christian Ponder, Jake Locker, and Blaine Gabbert. Yeah. That draft class would have phenomenal players like Cam Newton, Von Miller, Julio Jones, AJ Green, Robert Quinn, Mike Pouncey, Jason Kelsey, Richard Sherman, Cameron Jordan, Jordan Cameron, DeMarco Murray, Mark Ingram, Muhammad Wilkerson, J.J. Watt, Patrick Peterson, Aldon Smith, Tyron Smith, Ryan Kerrigan, Randall Cobb, Andy Dalton, Kyle Rudolph. And not only that, if you think about it, Cam Newton and Andy Dalton were the only 2 Pro Bowl quarterbacks from that draft class of 2011. Yeah, so, yeah. Like I said, this draft class, Marius Darius, I cannot pronounce his name. Please forgive me. He played for the Buffalo Bills. This definitely is going to be a Hall of Fame draft class. It's not yet right now, but they definitely going to be a Hall of Fame draft class because 2011 was a phenomenal draft class that I know of. Another phenomenal draft class of the NFL is the draft class of 1989. Now, this draft class definitely has 5 Hall of Famers. And not only that they have 5 Hall of Famers, the only bust from this draft class is offensive tackle Tony Mandarich. Tony Mandarich was a bust, okay? He was horrible. But the great players from that draft class would be Troy Aikman, Derek Thomas, Barry Sanders, Deion Sanders. And look at what happened. Those guys will be in the Hall of Fame, and a couple of them won a couple Super Bowls. So, yeah, that definitely was a phenomenal draft class. And not only that they had some awesome Hall of Famers, they will also have Eric Metcalf, who was a phenomenal running back or wide receiver. Phenomenal. And we will also have a phenomenal safety by the Denver Broncos, and that would be Steve Atwater. Steve Atwater was a tall physical safety, and not only that, he was the first person to put running back Christian Okoye on his behind. Yeah, he did. Everybody talked about that back then. I heard about that. I seen it. Boom. I was like, whoa. Because Christian Okoye was running everybody down. Yeah, he didn't run down Steve Atwater, so yeah. Steve Atwater definitely would be part of the back-to-back Denver Broncos. And of course, Troy Aikman would be part of that 1990s Dallas Cowgirls dynasty. And of course, Deion Sanders will win Super Bowls back-to-back. He actually won one with the 49ers and then the Cowgirls. And then of course, Barry Sanders was a phenomenal running back for the Detroit Lions. He retired very early. I believe if he would have went to a different team, he definitely would have played in the league longer than what he had. But Barry Sanders, phenomenal. Derek Thomas definitely was one of the greatest outside linebackers. I mean, he's definitely in the Hall of Fame. It's a shame his life was cut short, due to an accident. But Derek Thomas, phenomenal. Another player from this draft class would be Andre Rison, who was a phenomenal journeyman wide receiver. He did win Super Bowl 31 with the Green Bay Packers, but yeah, he definitely was a journeyman, but he was a good wide receiver. And then we also have Daryl Johnston, who was a fullback for the Dallas Cowgirls, who was part of that 1990s dynasty. He also would pave the way for Emmitt Smith. So Emmitt Smith definitely gave him a shout out when he went to the Hall of Fame, because he said, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have made all those rushing yards. So shout out to Daryl Johnston. That's the class of 1989. Yeah. Another phenomenal draft class is the draft class of 1961. Now, this draft class has 7 Hall of Famers. And believe it or not, they will have a phenomenal tight end, Mike Ditka, who will be part of that 1971 Dallas Cowgirls Super Bowl team. And he will be the head coach of the 1985 Chicago Bears. So he actually started with the Bears, and then he played with the Eagles and then the Cowgirls. So he coached a team that he got drafted by. Mike Ditka was a heck of a tight end, man. Heck of a tight end. And not only that, from that draft class, we would have James Earl Jimmy Johnson, who was a phenomenal safety for the San Francisco 49ers. He definitely would be part of the 60s and 70s 49ers, and he's in the Hall of Fame. So give a shout out to James Earl Jimmy Johnson. And then another phenomenal player from that draft class would be defensive back Herb Adderley. Herb Adderley was a phenomenal defensive back for the Green Bay Packers. And not only that, he would be part of the Green Bay's, well, as I should say, Vince Lombardi's Green Bay Packers. He would win 2 Super Bowls, 5 NFL championships. Well, actually, he won 3 Super Bowls. 2 with the Packers, 1 with the Cowgirls. Cowgirls. You get what I'm saying. I don't like the Cowgirls. He was a phenomenal defensive back. Herb Adderley. Another player from that draft class would be Bob Lilly. Now, Bob Lilly was part of that 1971 Super Bowl VI championship with the Dallas Cowboys. Phenomenal defensive tackle, and he's definitely in the Hall of Fame. Some people said they were scared of him too. Bob Lilly was good. And another player from that draft class of 1964. 1961 would be quarterback Fran Tarkenton. Fran Tarkenton. He was the first quarterback to start doing that scrambling, moving, before Randall Cunningham, before Michael Vick. He would scramble out of the pocket, and defensive ends were so mad. But, that's just how he played. Even his head coach was mad. Noah Van Brocklin, but that's just who he was. He would go on and play with the Minnesota Vikings, and then he would go on and play with the New York Giants, and then come back to the Minnesota Vikings. And he was part of those 1970s Super Bowl teams of the Minnesota Vikings, even though they lost him. But he's definitely a phenomenal quarterback, and he's in the Hall of Fame. Shout out to the class of 1961. Yeah. Another player from that 1961 draft class would be one of the greatest defensive ends of all time. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, Deacon Jones. Now, Deacon Jones was definitely a phenomenal football player. Definitely a defensive end. And not only that, he will be part of that fearsome foursome. And he's in the Hall of Fame. And he is the one that came up with the term sacking the quarterback. Shout out to Deacon Jones, who was a phenomenal player. And it's in the Hall of Fame. Another draft player, or should I say, draft class that was phenomenal. And that draft class is the draft class of 1983. Ha! Now, that draft class definitely has some Hall of Famers. They have 9 Hall of Famers and a couple Super Bowl players. Prime example, from that draft class, you have the great John Elway, who actually got drafted by the Baltimore Colts and then traded to the Denver Broncos. And the rest is history. He would win back-to-back Super Bowls with the Denver Broncos. He would actually play in 3 more Super Bowls before he lost 3 Super Bowls, but yeah, he got his 2, so I give him that. Another player from that draft class who was phenomenal and still holds that rushing record in one season, as I mentioned earlier, and that is, ladies and gentlemen, Eric Dickerson, who was a phenomenal running back for the LA Rams. And he would go on and play with the Indianapolis Colts too. But he still was a phenomenal running back. He was a big dude. He was like, 6'3", playing running back? Man, Eric Dickerson. Shout out to him. Another great player from that draft class of 1983 is Dan Marino. Now, Dan Marino definitely was a phenomenal quarterback. He is one of the greatest quarterbacks to never win a Super Bowl. His second season, he played in the Super Bowl, but he lost against Joe Montana. And not only that, he has set the record by throwing the most touchdown passes in the season. At that time, it was 48. Man, can you imagine if Dan Marino won a Super Bowl? Oh, he definitely would have been on that Super Bowl list of winning for quarterbacks. But he didn't. But he is in the Hall of Fame. He set a lot of records. Dan Marino was a phenomenal quarterback. Another player from this draft class, as I should say, quarterback, would be Jim Kelly. Now, Jim Kelly got drafted by the Buffalo Bills. He is the only quarterback for the Buffalo Bills that took them to 4 straight Super Bowls, even though they lost all 4 of them. But he definitely is a Hall of Famer. Jim Kelly, phenomenal quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. And not only that, another player from that draft class would be Ken O'Brien, who was the quarterback of the New York Jets. He was actually pretty good after Joe Namath. Well, way after Joe Namath. But yeah, he was another Pro Bowl quarterback that I can think of besides Chad Pennington. Yeah. And then we will also have Darrell Green, who played cornerback for the Washington Redskins. He would actually win 2 Super Bowls with the Washington Redskins, and he's also in the Hall of Fame. And not only that, he was a short player. So, yeah. He was a short player, and he was fast, and he can hit. And they said to this day, at his age, whatever age he is now, he still can run fast. So that shows you how much of a good a player that Darrell Green was. Phenomenal. He played in the league for 20 years, actually. So, yeah. Another player from that draft class would be Leonard Marshall, who will be known for who did that hard hit in the 1990 NFC Championship against the San Francisco 49ers to Joe Montana, who will win 2 Super Bowls with the New York Giants, excuse me, by the way. And not only that, we will have a very underrated player by the name of Roger Craig, who will win 3 Super Bowls with the San Francisco 49ers, who had 1,000 receiving yards and 1,000 rushing yards in the season, or maybe a 2 or 3 or 4. Roger Craig was good. Yeah, he definitely was. And we will also have Charles Mann, who won a Super Bowl with the Washington Redskins and later on with the San Francisco 49ers, who was a phenomenal defensive end for the Washington Redskins. And not only that, we will also have Richard Dent. Now, Richard Dent was part of that 85 Bears defense. And not only that, he won Super Bowl 20 MVP. He will go on and win another Super Bowl with the San Francisco 49ers, and he definitely is in the Hall of Fame. Richard Dent was phenomenal, man. Phenomenal. Honorable mentions, as I should say. Draft class of 2004. Eli Manning actually got drafted by the San Diego Chargers, and Phillip Rivers got drafted by the New York Giants. So they would make the trade. So Eli would go to the Giants, Phillip would go to the Chargers. Can you imagine if that trade would have never happened? Phillip Rivers probably would have won those Super Bowls, and Eli Manning probably wouldn't have won. But Eli Manning won 2 Super Bowls, and not only that, Phillip Rivers is going to be in the Hall of Fame, just like Eli Manning. They're not in the Hall of Fame yet. And not only that, from this draft class, we will also have only 2 Hall of Fame players from this draft class. And those 2 players are Jared Allen, who was a phenomenal defensive end for the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Minnesota Vikings. He would be part of that 2015 Carolina Panthers Super Bowl team. And not only that, Larry Fitzgerald was part of that 2008 Super Bowl 43 running team for the Arizona Cardinals. Larry Fitzgerald was a phenomenal wide receiver. He definitely was. He barely dropped the ball. He always caught the ball with his hands. I mean, he was the ball boy for the 98 Minnesota Vikings. I mean, look who was on that team, Chris Carter and Randy Moss. So that's why he caught the ball so well. I believe if he would have went to another team, he probably definitely would have won a Super Bowl, but he stayed with the Arizona Cardinals, which is understanding. Another player from that draft class would be quarterback Ben Roethlisberger, who won 2 Super Bowls with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ben Roethlisberger, Big Ben, definitely a phenomenal quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And we will also have D'Angelo Hall, who was a good defensive back. He actually got drafted by the Falcons, and he would go on and play with the Washington Redskins. And not only that, we will have Vince Wilfork, who was a phenomenal defensive tackle for the Patriots, who won 2 Super Bowls. Chris Snee, who was a good offensive lineman, who won 2 Super Bowls with the New York Giants. And then we will also have Bob Sanders, who was a phenomenal safety for the Indianapolis Colts, who was part of the Super Bowl 41 Super Bowl champion Indianapolis Colts. And not only that, we will also have a phenomenal player by the name of Sean Taylor, who unfortunately lost his life. If he would have never lost his life too soon, Sean Taylor definitely would have been in the league longer, and he would have been making records, breaking records, because he definitely was a hard-hitting safety. Sean Taylor died too soon, died so young. And another honorable mention draft class of all time is the class of 2014. Oh my goodness, the class of 2014. Like, no, let me stop. We would have players like Jadeveon Clowney, who was the first overall draft pick by the Houston Texans, who had a heck of a career. And then we had Odell Beckham Jr. That was another draft class that had draft of wide receivers. Odell Beckham, who caught the ball with 3 fingers. Everybody still talk about that. Later on, he would become part of that Super Bowl 56 champions of the LA Rams. Yeah, Odell Beckham, he was good. He was good. Made some crazy catches. And then we will also have wide receiver Sammy Watkins, who was drafted by the Buffalo Bills, but he will become part of that Super Bowl 54 Kansas City Chiefs team. And not only that, we have the great Khalil Mack, who's a phenomenal defensive end or outside linebacker, whatever you call him, because he got drafted by the Oakland Raiders. He's a Hall of Famer. Well, not just yet, but he's going to be in the Hall of Fame as I can see it. He's a Pro Bowl player too. So, yeah, Khalil Mack. I like Khalil Mack. We also had Jake Matthews, who was a phenomenal offensive tackle for the Atlanta Falcons. And not only that, his dad, I believe, is Bruce Matthews, who was definitely offensive tackle for the Houston Oilers, Tennessee Oilers, Tennessee Titans. He had 14 Pro Bowls playing different parts of the offensive lineman. I mean, like, who does that? Bruce Matthews was definitely a good offensive lineman. And his brother Clay Matthews was definitely a phenomenal defensive end or defensive tackle too. Yeah, shout out to the Matthews family. Clay Matthews Jr. too. Yeah. And not only that, we also had Mike Evans, who had a phenomenal run with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who ever since he's been in the league, he always had over 1,000 receiving yards in the season. He will be definitely part of that Super Bowl 55 champions of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Yeah, Mike Evans was actually good, man. I actually liked him. He was good. And then we also had wide receivers like Kelvin Benjamin, Brandon Cooks, Jordan Matthews, who was actually drafted by the Eagles. Brandon Cooks was drafted by the New Orleans Saints, and Kelvin Benjamin, of course, was drafted by the Carolina Panthers. Yeah, 2014, that was actually all right draft class, like I said. And then we also had Ryan Shazier. It's a shame that his career ended due to injury. I'm just glad that he's able to walk again. If he would have never had that injury, Ryan Shazier definitely would have been in the Hall of Fame. He definitely would have been in the league longer than what he had. But unfortunately, his career was cut short due to injury. Yeah, he made a tackle and it made him paralyzed. But he's able to walk again, though. I give him that. And not only that, we also would have Zach Martin, who was a phenomenal offensive lineman for the Dallas. And then we had C.J. Mosley, who was a good linebacker for the Ravens. And not only that, we also had Derek Carr, who was a phenomenal quarterback for the Oakland Raiders and then Las Vegas Raiders. And then he went on to the Saints. Derek Carr was good. Derek Carr. But we also had a phenomenal defensive tackle by the name of Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald was a phenomenal defensive tackle. And not only that, he was strong. He was also part of that Super Bowl 56 Super Bowl champion of the LA Rams. He actually got drafted by the St. Louis Rams. And then when they relocated, he stayed with the Rams. So, yeah, Aaron Donald. I liked Aaron Donald. And not only that, we will also have players like Devontae Adams, who's another phenomenal wide receiver in the NFL. And we will also have DeMarcus Lawrence, who actually got drafted by Dallas, and then he would go on and win the Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks. Dallas. Psych, no, let me stop. But 2014 definitely was a phenomenal draft class. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is your list of the best NFL draft class, or should I say draft year. Now, before we go off with this episode, I'm going to need everybody to do me a favor. Make sure y'all hit thumbs up. No. Subscribe, hit that thumbs up, leave a comment, and hit that notification button. And make sure y'all tell your friends about the Young Brother of Soul podcast show. And make sure y'all tune in, because there's going to be more episodes coming from the Young Brother of Soul on the Young Brother of Soul podcast show. I just want to say thank y'all so much for supporting me again. Thank you for watching. And like I said, I didn't forget about the ones that want to be interviewed, because I definitely cannot wait to interview for the Young Brother of Soul podcast show. Thank you. Have a good one. And like I said, don't forget to tell your family and friends to subscribe, hit that thumbs up, leave a comment, and hit that notification button. Thank you. Have a good one.